Hey everybody, thanks for being here. My name is Brendan.
I'm Liesel.
And we're here to talk about organic weed management on a small scale. So we're the farmers with Snugglebug Farm. We started developing Snugglebug in 2022. Our property is 30 acres in total. We're about a 30-minute drive southeast of Fayetteville. We're certified organic. Our business is 100% wholesale. 2024 was our second season in production, and we grossed just over $40,000 on 1/5 of an acre. Liesel and I both farm 2 days a week on average at Snugglebug. We both work full-time off the farm. And we had a baby in early April last year, which made for a very interesting spring. But we've all kind of settled into our new roles. Liesel and I still co-manage the farm, and our son Finnegan is in charge of marketing and motivation. We also manage an urban farm in southwest Missouri. So Liesel and I started Finley Farms in 2020. The logistics of managing 2 different farms in 2 different states can be challenging, but we really like what we get to do for work. We grow a wide diversity of crops, produce, and flowers for a farm-to-table restaurant and multiple farmers markets. Our job is kind of a mix of production and farm-based education. So we're really proud of what we do for the surrounding community. And we utilize a lot of similar weed management tools and techniques on both farms. Finley Farms is about a 1/2 acre in production right now.
All right, so some of the things we're going to talk about are silage tarps. We use a lot of those. Landscape fabric, hand tools, transplants, mulch, and cover crops. So this is our first field. So we got our land in 2022, March. And in May, we spent the first couple of months cleaning up the property. And this slide is in May of that year. So we started with a field of, it was a fallow field of Bermuda grass and Johnson grass. Very fun. So we laid down silage tarps, and we initially covered 1/3 of an acre. And over the course of that year, we kept adding and adding and adding. So we got about 3/4 of an acre covered by the end of the year in silage tarps.
Yeah, we just added them as we could based on our availability and the wind conditions. Nothing will test the relationship quite like trying to put a silage tarp down on a windy day. So these things are giant kites, and so they work really well, and but you just want to be careful of wind conditions. We've definitely gotten some pretty wild situations in the past. So we took our first silage tarp off in March of 2023 after it had been down for 10 months. All the perennial Bermuda and Johnson grass was dead, and then we used our BCS rototiller to loosen up the soil about 6 inches deep. We used a rotary plow to form raised beds 30 inches wide. And then from that point on, we were broad forking, and we use a tilter, which is a drill-powered, electric drill-powered 2-inch tiller, basically. So we're really only tilling for incorporating amendments into the top 2 inches of these permanent raised beds. They don't really move. They're kind of in place. And that's a form of weed management for us. We're trying to keep the weed seed deeper in the soil from churning it back up. So we try not to invert the layers so deeply. So we're not afraid of tillage, and we appreciate strategic tillage, but we try to till very shallowly whenever we can to not bring up new weed seeds to the soil surface. So this is what our first field looked like in April of 2023. It felt really good to know that we were passively eradicating all these perennial grasses, Bermuda and Johnson grass, but it was very challenging to navigate a BCS around all these sandbags.
All right, so we grow a lot of transplants. Growing transplants is a form of weed management for us because we can get a plant, put a relatively mature plant into the ground that gives us several weeks lead ahead of the weeds. So it makes it easier for us to cultivate around. And just general, that's easier for us to manage. Because we're farming in 2 different places that are 2 hours away from each other, we have all of our drip irrigation set up on an automatic system. And we have to, our crop selection also goes into a lot of this. We have to pick crops that only need to be harvested once a week. So we're growing a lot of onions and kale and peppers and things like that. We can't grow cucumbers that need to be harvested more often at this point. And so this is the same field 14 months after we laid the tarps. So this is just before, around the time that we were harvesting our first crops. So 14 months after those initial tarps were laid down, we had certified organic crops coming out of there.
So this is an aerial view in September of our first growing season. Not all of the area under tarps was intended for vegetable production, but we were trying to establish a pretty wide buffer to just terminate all the Bermuda and Johnson grass so it didn't creep in. It was a lot of Bermuda and Johnson grass. It was a very intimidating field to start out with. And then we have since, we pulled off a lot of these tarps September. This is September 2023. In September of 2024, we pulled off a lot of these tarps. We prepped more space for a larger hoop house and some new fields. And then we moved those tarps down to our 9 acres in transition. So we've got another like half acre or so under tarps. And that's part of our long-term strategy for slowly terminating passively the Bermuda and Johnson grass. It feels really good to know that if we needed to, we could expand the farm pretty rapidly without having a lot of perennial grasses to deal with. We are planning on building a hoop house in this field that's covered in tarps now, but we would feel totally comfortable leaving the tarps on for another year or two. We're trying to grow our business very intentionally, and we'll put tarps back on as needed if we need to put pause on weed growth. So plenty to say on tarps after the presentation if anybody has questions on that. We also use landscape fabric around the borders of our fields to help cut back on weeds. So any caterpillar tunnels that we construct pound their posts directly into landscape fabric, and then we have landscape fabric around the borders on the ends of any of our production beds as well. And we will, go ahead.
Yeah. One thing, we don't use landscape fabric in the beds. So a lot of people will see that pretty commonly where you'll burn holes and lay the landscape fabric on the bed and then plant directly into that. We have done that in the past. It doesn't work very well in our system now because we do a lot of paper plot transplanting, and it feels like we can flip beds faster when we don't do that. But that is an option that a lot of people like, but we don't do it at this time.
But we do still use landscape fabric to cover individual beds. We found that to be really effective because we're always tight on time, especially in the summer when we're harvesting a lot. We might completely harvest one bed in one of our caterpillar tunnels, for example, but not have time to prep and amend it for another planting. And so putting landscape fabric over it before we leave is a great way to just suppress any additional weeds that are going to grow before we can get back to that. Or if we manage to carve out enough time via headlamp to prep the bed and amend it, we use a tilther and it's ready for planting, but we just didn't have time to plant it. We can also put the landscape fabric on the prepped bed, and that helps conserve soil moisture. And it's just really satisfying to come back the next week with plants ready to go, pull the landscape fabric off, and plant right into it. We've done this with silage tarps too. Like we'll cut silage tarps in smaller sections. They're a little bit heavier. They do a really great job accelerating decomposition of any organic residues that are on the soil surface. But the landscape fabric is a lot lighter to use. It's easier to use on a windy day, and it allows like water to go through, which is really nice too. So, and yeah, as Liesel mentioned, we do a lot of paper pot transplanting. It's one of the main ways we can manage our farm 2 days a week with actual farming. And we use a tilther to kind of loosen up the soil before planting.
I mentioned transplants before. We have greenhouse space that we utilize at our job. So we, have our jobs, and then we, after work, seed all of our own plants and have our own soil and everything up there. So we have this, our farming production is kind of split. Like our farm is all down in Arkansas, and our transplant production is at our jobs where we have utilized this extra space. So then we transport all of our transplants down to our farm in our cooler trailer. So there is sometimes where, like Brendan's has said, where we put the pause on a bed with landscape fabric. Sometimes that's because we can't transport all of our plants down at once. But, transplants in general, just having those is a really big a big part of our weed management strategy.
Because we're certified organic, our inspector has to visit both farms because this is where our certified organic transplants are grown. So we help coordinate a bulk order of Morgan compost potting soil that we get from Michigan for a lot of local farmers in the Ozarks. And I know CAFF just coordinated an order as well for some Arkansas farms from the same source. But they have to physically drive to both farms to verify all the steps in our production, which is great because it's preserving the integrity. But it's a little painful because it costs extra for mileage. And the certifier will show up and go, yep, it's exactly like it looked like in the pictures. So a little challenging, but it's good to know that we're doing it right. And we feel very fortunate to have access to greenhouse space at our jobs. We do a lot of cultivation with hand tools. Our favorite are the wire weeders. These are kind of like a number 9 wire, like a dull triangle on a broom handle, which you could make by bending your own wire and using a hose clamp to clamp it onto a broom handle. We use the NeverSync tool version. I know Johnny's has a new system where there's different size wire weeders or collinear hose or whatever attachment you want to put into the handle, which is really great. Because we use a tilther, we try to keep the top 2 inches of our soil pretty loose, and so the wire weeders are really effective. We can cultivate very quickly, and the idea of this is just scraping the soil surface lightly to kind of break up any small weeds in the thread-like stage when they're just establishing. So you want to be cultivating before you see the weeds, ideally, and this is a really enjoyable activity for me. I'll put a podcast in and just get my steps in. And I like the wire weeder because you can bump up into the drip tape or the base of some of your plants without cutting or killing anything. If the weeds get ahead of us, the stirrup hoe to the right in the middle there is kind of the next big gun in our toolkit, and that will just kind of cut weeds on the soil surface. Takes a little bit more effort to use. It's not as ergonomic. It's almost like you're playing pool with it. Instead of like sweeping with a broom with the collinear hoe. And then we use a larger version of that on a wheel hoe for cultivating our paths, and we'll also use that for our beds if we're in between crops or trying to transition to another planting. And then for any crabgrass or summer grasses or anything with a taproot, this blue-handled tool is called a Cobra weeder. They're $30 from Johnny's, and it's an awesome tool to have in your kit. It just helps kind of loosen up the deeper taproots or the grasses to pull them up. And that's a hand weeding tool when it gets to that point in August.
Yeah, ideally we're doing as little hand pulling as possible. And so we also use a lot of mulch. We just started doing this last year when we were able to source the leaf mold from the city of Fayetteville. It's free from there, but we pay a driver to bring out 20 yards at a time. And so we've been using a lot of that. We amend the beds first and then add a thick layer of the leaf mulch on there and then plant directly through that. So our kale there. And then, so we're farming on such a small scale, we're trying to get lots of crops in the same beds, like back to back. So the cilantro goes in after the kale. We plant another thing after that. Like we try to get 3 crops per bed. That's how we can like maximize the space on such a small scale. But so we put that kale in. We mulched before the kale went in. We were able to put the cilantro in after that. We were able to put something else after that. And the leaf mulch, it's great organic matter. It does break down pretty relatively quickly, but we still had into the fall good weed suppression with that. Plus it's adding organic matter in, preserving moisture. We really like that. We also put a thicker layer on our peppers because they're in the ground longer than most of the other crops. And we run the drip tape right on top. You can still side dress those just by making a little channel in the mulch and put our fertilizers right in there. We also plan to get into more fertigation, so this would be a great way to do that as well. We could just put it through the drip, but we haven't started doing any of that yet.
We try to integrate cover crops into our production system whenever possible. We really like buckwheat in the summer for weed suppression. It grows fast and forms a really dense canopy. I'm really excited to get a seed drill in the future. Right now I'm seeding all this with a single row Jang seeder, staying fit. And then we like to let it flower before we use a flail mower to kind of chop it up into a finer residue. We do it in the tunnels as well. We'll put drip tape down to help get it established if we're gone for the week. It can be hard on in a dry, hot week to get the cover crop established, but it takes off pretty quickly. And you can see, there's like 4 to 5 weeks between these pictures, so it just forms a really dense canopy quickly, and then we'll mow it to help accelerate the decomposition. We were using silage tarps in our tunnels to smother this. It works great, but they can be heavy and wet in the summertime, depending on how you're storing them. And it becomes a 2-person job, kind of at minimum. They're just so heavy to move around. And if conditions are windy, it might not be possible. So we started using landscape fabric. 1 person can lay out. We have these pre-cut 100-foot sections of landscape fabric. That works really well. It doesn't accelerate the decomposition quite as well as a silage tarp, but it gets the job done, and 1 person can do it on a windy day. So it's nice to have in our toolkit. And then the last techniques we started experimenting this with last year at Finley Farms is crimping cover crops on a small scale. So this was annual ryegrass that we seeded, winter rye, in November of 2023. And in April of 2024, we took a T-post and crushed it down.
Yeah, the way we did that was when you take a T-post and one of those kind of sharper edges, point that down. We tied a rope on either end of it. So it's a 2-person job, somebody on either end, and then you just kind of like stomp it in. It's labor intensive, but it worked really well. And for on a larger scale, it'd be great to have a crimper for the tractor, but on this scale, it works really well.
It helped to play a little techno music so we could kind of get in rhythm with each other. And then once we crimped it every 10 inches or so. We put a silage tarp on for 2 weeks, and when we pulled it off, we had this beautiful straw mulch that we'd grown in place, which was awesome.
It's been really hard for us to source. Finley Farms isn't certified organic, but we do manage it that way. And so it's been hard for us to find like a certified organic straw mulch, or also just a straw that we trust that's not bringing in a bunch of weeds. So doing this, it's been a great solution for us to kind of just grow our straw in place. And we are planning to do it a little bit more this year for some of our longer season crops there.
Yeah, so in this context, we were just growing Bloody Butcher flint corn for the restaurant, but we can see the advantage of this system for any long-term crops that are in the ground for most of the summer season, so peppers or eggplants, okra. We're pretty excited to experiment with this, and we'll keep you posted on how it goes. That's pretty much all we have to report on the small-scale weed management front. Thanks so much for having us.